Imagine a quiet evening on the Montana plains suddenly shattered by gunfire, an entire wagon caravan destroyed, and one elderly survivor emerging from the wreckage. In a landscape drenched in blood and suspicion, this woman stands at the heart of a secret so explosive it could plunge the region into all-out conflict. By a twist of fate, she finds a protector in a lone Crow scout forging an alliance that defies every expectation. Who truly orchestrated the massacre? And can they uncover the truth before another innocent life is lost? If you're eager to follow every gripping twist, her defiance in the face of ruthless conspirators, the tense negotiations with cavalry officers, and the hard-won trust among her unlikely new companions, then listen on. Don't forget to subscribe if this account resonates with you. By doing so, you help us share powerful stories of courage and compassion with many more people. The resolution to this chilling frontier mystery awaits. Stay tuned for the full story. In the vast grasslands of Montana Territory in 1868, a horrifying scene stretched across the tall summer grasses. 17 wagons once filled with pioneers and dreams of a better life now lay in shambles. Wood-splintered cargo strewn and bodies motionless under the waning light. The place locals called Long Prairie was eerily silent, save for the faint sound of a lone figure sifting through the wreckage. This man, known as Kamota, a Crow Scout employed by the U.S. Cavalry at Fort High Bridge, moved among the debris with a practiced calm. He noted the hoof prints, spent bullet casings, and discarded bits of clothing. Though the Army would likely blame the Crow people for this massacre, Kamota recognized the signs of disguised attackers aiming to stir trouble. Then he heard a sound almost lost in the evening wind, a muffled cry from beneath an overturned wagon whose canvas still smoldered. Instinctively, his hand went to the knife at his belt. He crept closer, cautious but compelled to see if anyone survived the carnage. Lifting a scorched flap of canvas, he discovered a pale-eyed elderly woman clutching a worn family Bible to her chest. Her face was streaked with soot, and her once practical dress hung in tatters. She was Harriet Caldwell, perhaps in her early 70s, with gray hair tangled around her face. The sight of her breathing felt like a small miracle amid unspeakable tragedy. Kamota spoke in careful English. His voice kept low so as not to startle her. "I won't harm you. Those who attacked are gone." Trembling Harriet allowed him to help her crawl free from the wagon's shadow. She stared numbly at the bodies scattered nearby. One form lying within arm's reach of the wagon wheels was that of a middle-aged man whose outstretched hand told of a final desperate effort to protect someone. "That's my son, Paul," she whispered, the steely resolve in her voice at odds with her frail appearance. "They killed all of them, my daughter-in-law, my 3 grandchildren. Everyone," though Harriet's body shook from exertion and shock. Her mind was clear. Kamota recognized that while she was physically fragile, her spirit seemed unbroken. He introduced himself with a slight bow, explaining he was a scout for Fort High Bridge, known among his people as the Apsaluki, or Crow. Harriet's eyes flickered at the mention of Crow, but she did not flinch. She had seen the killers wearing false feathers and face paint, and she knew the truth of who they really were. "What will the Army do?" Harriet asked, despair etched into every line of her weathered features. Kamota paused. The cavalry would arrive soon, see the staged evidence, and doubtless blame the Crow. Their commanding officers cared little for nuance. They wanted quick scapegoats. Harriet Caldwell, the sole living witness, might well be silenced or dismissed. Kamota feared that unscrupulous men, possibly on the payroll of a ruthless miner named Clayton Rivers, had orchestrated the attack to implicate the Crow and force them off their land. "We have little time," he said, gesturing to the blood-spattered grass. "More riders could come. We should leave," but Harriet Caldwell remained steadfast. "I won't depart until my family rests in the ground. Help me bury them, then I'll go wherever you say." Kamota assessed the setting sun, realizing they had only a few hours before darkness made traveling dangerous. Yet he also saw the desperation in Harriet's eyes and understood that refusing her would crush the last remnants of her will. Nodding, he fetched a broken shovel from among the wreckage. The two worked side by side, Harriet ignoring the pain in her arthritic hands to scrape shallow graves for her loved ones. By the time Harriet and Kamota finished burying her son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren, dusk had surrendered to night, 17 graves in total. Each marked with a stone or a battered piece of wagon wood, bore witness to the now extinguished dreams of the Caldwell party. In the flickering light of a hastily made torch, Harriet recited solemn verses from her family Bible. Her voice, though strained, did not waver. She had known heartbreak before losing her husband decades earlier in Ohio, nursing neighbors through fevers, but this catastrophe stood unparalleled. When the burials were done, Kamota gently guided her away from the site. "If we remain, we risk more harm," he said softly. Harriet nodded, her legs trembling beneath her. The only living horse, a skittish mare that had bolted during the gunfire, had returned to the site, drawn by the scent of something familiar. Kamota helped Harriet mount while he led the horse on foot. They aimed south, hoping to stay hidden from any patrol that might investigate. Traveling at night in the Montana grasslands was perilous. Cougars prowled the foothills, and hidden ravines or sudden drop-offs posed serious dangers. Harriet's frail form swayed in the saddle, her exhaustion obvious. Yet she clung to the mare's mane and to her Bible, which was stained with blood that had seeped onto its leather cover. She asked Kamota, "Why would anyone do this? My son talked of conflict with the tribes, but these men were white, painted to appear as Crow." "It makes no sense," Kamota offered a quiet exhalation. "They want the army to blame my people," he explained. "A wealthy miner named Clayton Rivers has long coveted the Crow territory for rumored silver deposits. If the Crow are declared hostile, the cavalry will drive them onto a distant reservation, and Rivers gains free access to the land." Harriet was silent for a time, absorbing this monstrous plan to kill families just to manipulate policy. This cruelty sickened her more than any disease she had ever treated. At a small creek, they paused to water the mare and allow Harriet to stretch her stiff joints. She removed a small wooden box from the remains of her personal belongings, rummaging for herbs she used to manage her arthritic pain. "This is devil's claw," she murmured, showing Kamota the dried root. "It helps my bones ache less." He nodded, recognizing the universal language of healing plants. They continued onward, with Harriet dozing intermittently in the saddle, jolted awake now and then by the horse's uneven steps. Kamota maintained a wary eye on the horizon, scanning for shapes in the moonlight that might signal pursuit. He knew a cavalry patrol would be close behind, and if the soldiers arrived to find Harriet alive, they might twist her account to fit the false narrative. She could also become a target for Rivers' men, who would want to erase the one person capable of contradicting them. At last, shortly before dawn, they found a grove of cottonwoods nestled along a larger stream. Kamota built a discreet fire, carefully shielded by branches, and spread out a worn blanket for Harriet. She sagged onto it in total exhaustion. "I suppose I should thank you," she said quietly, fixing him with her tired, pale gaze. "You saved my life. At my age, I never expected to see such mercy from those I was taught to fear." Kamota studied her face. "We're just two survivors in a land that can be cruel. Let that be enough to bind us for now." The morning light revealed Harriet's hollow cheeks and trembling limbs more clearly. Despite the brief rest, her advanced years and the traumatic events weighed heavily on her. As she sipped a weak tea of boiled roots Kamota prepared, she recounted her life to him in halting intervals. She had grown up in Ohio, married young, and lost her husband to a fever when her only child, Paul, was still small. For decades, she worked a modest farm, supplementing her income by serving as a healer in the local community. People whispered that her methods, some inherited from a Cherokee grandmother, bordered on witchcraft, but they came to her anyway when sickness struck. "A year ago," Harriet explained, pressing a battered cloth to her eyes, "Paul insisted on traveling west, lured by news of rich farmland near Helena and the possibility of gold. I opposed it, but I couldn't watch my grandchildren leave without me. So I sold the farm, packed up what we could carry, and joined his wagon train. I never wanted to see Montana yet. Here I am." Kamota listened intently. He found a strange kinship in her story of sacrifice. He too had ventured beyond the bounds of his people, albeit for different reasons. "I was taken to the mission school as a boy," he offered after Harriet paused. "They said it would help me learn the white man's ways. I returned to my tribe with knowledge of English and reading, but also with scars I hide. Now as a scout, I walk between two worlds, mistrusted by both." Their eyes met. She recognized the weariness in his, the burden of divided loyalties. He recognized the dogged will beneath her frailty. Even if their backgrounds were starkly different, both understood the cost of surviving in a land that obeyed the strong and trampled the weak. They resumed travel in the late morning. Once Harriet's strength returned enough for her to ride again. It was vital they moved swiftly, avoiding known cavalry routes. Kamota had decided Harriet would be safest within the Crow's summer encampment, a hidden valley where families gathered and lived as best they could before winter migrations. "They might not welcome me," Harriet pointed out, voice trembling not from fear, but from pragmatic concern. "I'm an old white woman. Some might have lost loved ones to settlers' guns." Kamota acknowledged this risk. "My father, Silver Eagle, is a respected elder. My grandmother, Wise Leaf, is a medicine woman. They will stand for you if I explain what truly happened, but not all will trust easily. Anger runs deep. Harriet accepted this knowing she had no alternative. The cavalry would twist her words or dismiss her as Sino Rivers' men would kill her. Her only hope for justice and perhaps her own sense of closure lay in revealing the truth to the Crow, and then if possible to anyone in the army willing to listen. As the day wore on, they navigated increasingly rugged terrain, foothills dotted with pines, small canyons carved by glacial streams. Harriet marveled at the landscape despite her grief. In quieter times, she might have relished the beauty of endless skies and jagged peaks. Now each rocky pass or steep ascent tested her endurance, made her question how many days she truly had left. But Komota's presence reassured her. His calm competence in the face of these challenges lent her the will to keep going. That evening, they camped in a narrow ravine, lined with ancient spruce trees. Harriet, wincing as she dismounted, used the mare's saddle as a makeshift seat. Komota foraged for wild berries and prepared a modest meal with the dried game he carried. "You must have half a dozen souls in that body," Harriet mused, half smiling to manage all you do. Komota merely shrugged. "Living on the plains teaches you to be many things: hunter, scout, guide, protector." He offered Harriet some boiled herbs to ease her joint pain, continuing quietly, "We have a few more miles tomorrow before we reach my people's territory." Komota guided Harriet through a final narrow canyon that opened into a spacious valley ringed by forested slopes. Smoke rose in thin columns from a cluster of conical lodges, teepees, Harriet realized arranged in a wide circle near a bending river. Over the next few weeks, the Crow would gather here for seasonal ceremonies and communal hunts. For Harriet Caldwell, it was both an alien world and a potential sanctuary. They were challenged at the valley's entrance by two mounted warriors, their expressions stern as they took in Harriet's white skin and Komota's uniform trousers. Komota spoke quickly in the Crow language, explaining the circumstances. One of the warriors. Swift Otter reacted with visible skepticism, shaking his head and gesturing toward Harriet. Komota remained calm, pointing to Harriet's hands her Bible, and then pantomiming the act of helping her. Harriet, though she understood, not a word sensed tension. Eventually, the second warrior Broken Stone signaled for them to pass, but Harriet felt the weight of countless eyes upon her even before they reached the main camp. Inside the encampment, and around 30 teepees stood among the grasses. Children paused their play to stare. Adults abruptly halted conversations. Some faces showed open curiosity, others bore mistrust or anger. Harriet felt her pulse hammer in her chest. She recalled how Komota had warned her that many here had lost loved ones to settler aggression. To them, a white woman was no neutral presence. They made their way toward a larger teepee near the center of the circle. Outside, a man of about 50 winters, tall and imposing, waited with an older woman whose gray braids were decorated with bits of shell and quill. Komota dismounted, then helped Harriet off the mare, speaking words of introduction in Crow. The man, presumably Silver Eagle, studied Harriet with a measured gaze, while the elderly woman, Wise Leaf, walked around Harriet in a slow circle. Harriet sensed a trained healer's eye in the old woman's close inspection. She recognized the posture of assessing a patient. At length, Wise Leaf spoke in low melodic Crow phrases to Komota, who nodded gravely and turned to Harriet. "This is my father, Silver Eagle, and my grandmother, Wise Leaf," he explained. "She says you are exhausted and in need of medicine for your heart. My father welcomes you as his son's guest, but they must hear your story before the tribal council to decide how you fit among us." Harriet mustered her dignity, drawing herself up even though her legs threatened to buckle. "I have no other home," she replied softly, "and I carry a truth that must be shared." Silver Eagle led them into the large teepee which served as a council lodge. Inside, several elders were already gathering, men and women advanced in years, each bearing unique decorations that hinted at status or achievement. Harriet stood in the open area, Komota by her side, and carefully held her Bible against her chest. It struck her that she was entering a form of judgment again, as real as any courtroom in Ohio might have been, but with different laws and traditions. As Harriet began her account, Komota translated her words into the Crow tongue. She spoke of the families in her wagon train, listing them by name to prove her authenticity. She described the midday assault at Long Prairie, emphasizing the men were white, not Crow, and that she had overheard the name Clayton Rivers. At times her voice faltered, especially when speaking of Paul and his children. Yet each time Harriet's fierce resolve overcame grief. She'd spent her life mending sickness. Now she aimed to mend a lie that threatened an entire people. Once Harriet concluded her harrowing testimony, An older warrior named Strikes Fire spoke vehemently, his gestures leaving no doubt about his distrust. Though Harriet understood none of his words, Kamota later explained that Strikes Fire had lost two brothers in skirmishes with settlers. He questioned whether Harriet might be a government spy or an unwitting tool to infiltrate the crow's silence, followed broken only by the crackle of the central fire. It was then that Wiseleaf approached Harriet. The elderly medicine woman took Harriet's gnarled hand in hers. Examining the swollen joints, Harriet recognized the universal language of a healer diagnosing pain. To Harriet's surprise, Wiseleaf switched to halting English. "You, old but spirit strong. Survive big tragedy, truth in your eyes." Harriet's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, she realized that among healers, trust might form more swiftly than among warriors. Silver Eagle, who had listened intently, spoke again in Crow. Kamota translated. "My father says you must remain here until the council decides your fate. Some fear your presence. Others see value in your testimony. For now, you will stay in Wiseleaf's lodge as she watches over your health." Harriet nodded, gratitude mingling with anxiety. She had expected suspicion, but she also sensed a flicker of respect from some council members. A few even met her gaze as though weighing her words against the rumors they had heard. Kamota then addressed Harriet quietly. "They have given you a name, Endures the Storm. It acknowledges both your survival at Long Prairie and the hardships you now face in bridging these worlds." Harriet repeated the name in her mind. Endures the Storm. She thought of her arthritic bones, the lost farm in Ohio, her son's grave, and the massacre she should not have survived. The name felt oddly fitting. Wiseleaf led Harriet to a small teepee on the camp's perimeter. Inside, buffalo robes cushioned the ground and smoke from a small central fire drifted gently upward through the open top. Dried plants, sage, mint, and others Harriet didn't recognize hung from poles, filling the space with an aromatic blend that reminded Harriet of her own herb workshop back home. With gestures and sparse English, Wiseleaf indicated Harriet should sit. She then prepared a tea from carefully chosen herbs, presenting it with a kindly but firm expression. Harriet drank, finding it surprisingly palatable. She felt warmth flow through her, easing the ache in her joints. Over the next few days, Harriet's presence sent ripples through the camp. Children would peek curiously at the white-haired woman who walked slowly with her Bible and wooden box of medicines. Some of the older men watched her warily from a distance, while a few younger women approached tentatively, interested in Harriet's bandaged wrists or the odd contraptions in her medicine box. Harriet tried to greet them with what few Crow words Kamota taught her, a stilted exchange that often drew polite smiles. Meanwhile, tension simmered. Kamota came and went, gathering intelligence on the rumored attacks orchestrated by River's men. He reported that several small ranches had been raided with false Crow evidence left behind to incite the army further. Harriet's statement, contradicting the official story, was critical, but the cavalry would be slow to trust it without proof. The entire tribe was on alert. An attack by soldiers seemed increasingly likely if Rivers succeeded in portraying the Crow as a mortal threat. Despite the urgency, Harriet's daily life revolved around healing tasks with Wiseleaf. Their shared devotion to medicine forged a connection more solid than any treaty. Harriet showed how to grind devil's claw root for joint pain, while Wiseleaf demonstrated how certain local blooms could treat lung infections. Although Harriet initially struggled with the Crow language, the older woman proved a patient teacher. She repeated words using gestures until Harriet grasped them. After a lifetime of forging her own path, Harriet found unexpected solace in apprenticing under this wise Crow healer. One late summer afternoon, Harriet and Wiseleaf were sorting a newly gathered batch of roots and wildflowers, turning them into salves for winter storage. Kamota arrived in a rush, his face taut. Harriet set aside her mortar and pestle. The tension radiating from him told her the fragile peace had cracked further. "Clayton River's men have targeted more homesteads," Kamota explained, lips pressed tight with anger. "2 families were found scalped, clearly staged to incite rage against my people. The cavalry is already sending out new patrols, and Colonel Merriman at Fort Highbridge is calling for reinforcements." Harriet's heart clenched. She recalled the smell of gunpowder, the sight of her grandchildren lying still. Another wave of innocent blood spilled for the sake of River's ambitions. Silver Eagle convened the tribal council immediately. Harriet, though not a formal participant, and was invited to stand beside Wiseleaf, who insisted Harriet's voice mattered. For hours, the elders debated how to respond. Strikes Fire, as expected, argued for immediate evacuation, deeper into the mountains to evade the army. Others pointed out that fleeing might only confirm the cavalry's assumption of guilt. At length, Silver Eagle turned to Harriet. "Endures the storm," he said in Crow with Kamota. Translating, "Would you speak to the soldiers who suspect us? Reveal the truth of these massacres arranged by Rivers. Convince them that we had no hand in the bloodshed." Harriet felt the weight of many gazes upon her. She was just an elderly widow originally from Ohio carrying a battered family Bible. Yet the Crows saw her as a rare chance, a surviving witness who could refute Rivers' lies. "I will do whatever I can," she replied, voice trembling with resolve. "But you know they might dismiss me. They may say I'm senile or too damaged by grief to be reliable." Silver Eagle acknowledged this with a solemn nod. "You have proven your clarity of mind to us. The cavalry must at least listen." Strike's Fire objected, raising his voice in Crow. Kamota translated, "He says the risk is too great. If Harriet is taken by the soldiers, they could use her to claim we held her hostage. Or Rivers's men might kill her before she can speak." Harriet's chest tightened. The notion of returning to an environment where Rivers or his agents could silence her was terrifying. Yet she recalled her vow to speak truth to honor the lost families, including her own. Eventually, the council resolved on a plan. Harriet, accompanied by Kamota and two warriors skilled in stealth, would attempt a meeting with a more sympathetic cavalry officer rumored to be stationed at Fort Highbridge, Captain Coleridge, known for fairness. They would travel through back routes to avoid detection, carrying Harriet's sworn statement. If Captain Coleridge believed her, he could at least delay or question Colonel Merriman's march, buying time to expose Rivers. After the meeting, Harriet and Kamota returned to Wiseleaf's teepee. Harriet found her hands shaking. "I never expected at this age to be at the center of such a crisis," she murmured, exhaling sharply. "But if it prevents others from suffering my family's fate, I must do it." Wiseleaf placed a gnarled hand on Harriet's shoulder, speaking softly in Crow Brightwater. A young woman who had learned English at a mission school explained, "She says your name is well given. You endure storms and help us endure as well." That night, Harriet slept little. She thought of the upcoming journey, the confrontation with Colonel Merriman's unstoppable might, and the cunning cruelty of Rivers. She also thought of the Crow Wiseleaf's kindness, Kamota's unwavering sense of duty, and the children who viewed her with a mixture of awe and curiosity. They had taken her in when she had nothing. She vowed not to fail them. At daybreak, Harriet changed into clothing more appropriate for facing the cavalry, an old calico dress someone in the camp had traded for from passing merchants. She carefully brushed out her hair, tying it into a neat bun rather than the braids Wiseleaf preferred to style. The transformation felt symbolic, as if she were temporarily re-entering the white world's expectations. Yet beneath the surface, Harriet recognized she was no longer simply the Ohio widow. She was endures the storm shaped by tragedy and tempered by Crow kindness. Kamota arrived with two warriors, Tall Elk and Quiet Ring. Rain, both young men with keen eyes. They nodded respectfully to Harriet before confirming the route they would take. Their objective was to slip around cavalry patrols traveling through ravines and hidden trails. The meeting place, Buffalo Bend, a modest trading outpost, had been tentatively agreed upon by Captain Coleridge. After receiving word that a long-lost survivor needed to speak with him, Harriet wondered if Captain Coleridge would truly be different from his superiors. They departed under a rising sun, attracting a crowd of onlookers. Some watched with anxious expressions. Others offered gestures of encouragement. Wiseleaf pressed a small pouch of protective herbs into Harriet's hand. Little Fox ran up at the last second, giving Harriet a carved wooden bead shaped like a lark. "Keep safe," she insisted. Harriet bent to kiss the child's cheek, tears threatening. Only a few weeks had passed since Harriet first arrived in the camp, yet it felt like she was leaving a second home. Their journey began smoothly, the four riders weaving through pine-shaded valleys and fording shallow creeks. Harriet marveled again at Kamota's skill in reading the landscape. Every bent blade of grass or scuff on a rock seemed to inform him. They stopped at midday for a brief rest under some cottonwoods. Harriet stretched her stiff joints, grateful for the medicinal salves Wiseleaf had given her to rub on her hands and knees. As they neared Buffalo Bend, the open plains brought a new vulnerability. Harriet spotted cavalry scouts in the distance, though they kept far off. A single outpost building rose near a bend in the river with a corral behind it and a few wagons out front. Captain Coleridge and 3 soldiers had arrived by the time Harriet's party approached. He stood with arms folded, appearing neither hostile nor overly friendly. Harriet noticed lines of worry etched into his brow. Kamota led Harriet inside. The interior of the outpost smelled of tobacco and horse gear. On a rough wooden table lay maps and official documents. Captain Coleridge introduced himself, maintaining polite formality. I've heard rumors you survived the massacre at Long Prairie, he said to Harriet, and that you claim it was not the crow. Harriet met his gaze. I don't just claim it, sir. I know it. I saw the men responsible, heard them speak, and recognized the false signs they left. She detailed the entire event once again. Paul, Nancy, and the three grandchildren lost in the hail of bullets. The presence of disguised white men calling each other by names. Mention of Clayton Rivers organizing the slaughter. She produced a small ledger she had salvaged from her wagon, listing the families and the supplies each carried, explaining how no one named Rivers had been in their party. When she finished, Captain Coleridge sat quietly, his posture rigid. I appreciate your candor, he said at length. I've suspected something was off about these so-called crow raids, but Colonel Merriman is convinced of the tribe's guilt. He's already requested additional troops from the next fort citing an uprising. Harriet felt a chill. If Colonel Merriman dismissed her testimony, it might be too late to spare the crow from a devastating campaign. Then I beg you, she implored, give me a chance to prove Rivers' deception or at least delay the cavalry so we can unmask him. Captain Coleridge rose from his seat, pacing with eyes narrowed in thought. Your story directly contradicts official statements from Clayton Rivers, who claims to be a survivor. He's provided sworn affidavits that the crow ambushed your caravan. The colonel respects Rivers for his financial investments in the territory and sees no reason to doubt him. Harriet's knuckles tightened on her Bible. Rivers was never with our group, nor is he an investor. I suspect he's after the silver, rumored to lie under Crowlands. Quiet Rain and Tall Elk stood near the outpost door, their expressions vigilant. Kamota, arms crossed, regarded the captain. If Colonel Merriman truly values justice, he said calmly, he must weigh Harriet Caldwell's testimony. She has more reason to be believed than a man who stands to profit from war. Coleridge exhaled. I know. But if Rivers hears that Harriet's statement could undermine his story, he might act either by fleeing or by silencing her. Then let him show his hand. Harriet said, surprising even herself with the firmness in her tone. I'm old, Captain, and have little left to lose. But if my words can spare these people from a false war, I'll use them. Coleridge studied her face, recognizing the same steely resolve that had carried her through burial, after burial on that terrible day. There's a certain risk in that approach. I can't guarantee your safety if Rivers employs hired guns. Kamota exchanged a glance with Harriet. They had discussed a similar strategy at the Crow Camp lure. Rivers into exposing himself by making Harriet's survival public. We can keep Harriet at Fort Highbridge under guard. Kamota proposed publicly, we'll declare that she's pressing charges against Rivers for orchestrating the massacre. If he tries to hush it up, we'll catch him. Coleridge tapped his fingers on the table. Merriman outranks me, but I can maneuver enough to keep Harriet under protection. If Rivers attempts anything, we'll have evidence. And if Harriet's details check out, we might force the colonel to question Rivers' claims. Harriet exhaled with relief. I'll do it, she confirmed. Anything to stop more innocent people from dying. Within 2 days, Harriet found herself in a modest room at Fort Highbridge. Not quite a cell, but certainly restricted. Soldiers eyed her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. After all, it wasn't common for a 70-year-old woman to appear as a key witness in a potential scandal. Meanwhile, Kamota and the two warriors remained discreetly in the fort's vicinity, ready to step in. If Rivers launched a personal attack, Harriet wore the calico dress again, her braided hair undone. She was in every outward appearance an elderly settler lady with trembling hands and a weary gait. Word spread quickly that Harriet Caldwell, believed dead at Long Prairie, had resurfaced at the fort with shocking accusations. Although Colonel Merriman himself hadn't met her yet, he permitted Captain Coleridge to handle the matter of the old woman's testimony, presumably because he expected it to be easily discredited. Harriet sensed that as soon as Rivers or his allies recognized her as a serious threat, events would escalate. Sure enough, within 48 hours, Clayton Rivers arrived at Fort Highbridge, accompanied by two men Harriet recognized as the sort who handle problems for powerful employers. Kamota, watching from a distance, alerted Harriet. She sat in the colonel's makeshift office, back straight, waiting for Rivers to appear. When he strode in, his pressed suit and polished boots contrasted sharply with Harriet's simple attire. He eyed her with a sneer. I hear you're claiming we never traveled together, madam, he said in a tone dripping with condescension. You must be mistaken or ill from your ordeal. Harriet locked gazes with him, feeling her pulse quicken. She recalled how Paul had tried to reach her in those final moments, how Nancy's cries ended abruptly, how the grandchildren's future was stolen. I am neither ill nor mistaken. Remember Rivers, she replied evenly. I know what I saw at Long Prairie. Colonel Merriman took a seat behind the desk, shifting his stern gaze between Harriet and Rivers. Captain Coleridge stood off to the side, arms folded. Komoto was not allowed in the room, but Harriet sensed him just outside, ready. The entire fort seemed to hold its breath as Rivers settled into a chair, leaning back with brazen confidence. "You stand by your claim that I orchestrated the wagon train's destruction?" Rivers asked Harriet, an incredulous scoff lacing his words. Before Harriet could respond, Colonel Merriman broke in. "I've read the initial statements. Ms. Caldwell asserts she never saw you in her party, that the raiders were white men in disguise, and that you stand to gain from the crow's removal. This is quite an accusation." Rivers feigned pity. The poor woman endured unimaginable trauma. It's no wonder she's confused, mixing up details in her grief. He shifted to Harriet, voice condescending. "I was there, Mrs. Caldwell. I saw your son, Paul, try to fight back, but—" "Stop," Harriet snapped sharper than she intended. The memory of Paul's final moments flashed through her mind, fueling her anger. "You never laid eyes on my son, or you would know he wasn't armed at that time. He was assisting our guide, Reuben, who was the only one carrying a rifle. So do not speak to me of confusion." A flicker of uncertainty flashed across Rivers' face. Colonel Merriman frowned. "Reuben Walters was the official guide. Yes, he was found among the dead. If, as Mrs. Caldwell says, your details about him conflict with the known facts, how do you explain that?" Rivers' composure faltered briefly. "The chaos was terrible, Colonel. I could have mistaken one man for another. But I recall them begging for mercy from the savage crow." He launched into a lurid depiction of war-painted braves, screaming war cries, brandishing tomahawks, an account Harriet knew was staged. She shook her head, matching each false claim with calm contradictions. They had firearms with muzzle flashes typical of .44 rifles. "Not bows or tomahawks. You want me to believe you saw men with crow feathers, yet you can't name a single family that traveled with us," Captain Coleridge interjected. "Mr. Rivers, why does your timeline put the attack at dusk, whereas Mrs. Caldwell says midday? Who else from that wagon train can confirm your presence?" Rivers blustered. "They all died. I survived by hiding in the underbrush." Her mention of midday is clearly her memory fails. Colonel Merriman leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Rivers, your versions are inconsistent with each retelling, and I've received dispatches that more homesteads have been attacked in ways suspiciously similar to your alleged Crow massacre. My officers suspect deliberate staging." Rivers shot back. "Are you accusing me, Colonel, of faking Indian raids to line my pockets? That's preposterous." In that moment, Harriet observed Rivers' right hand dip toward his coat pocket. She recalled how Komoto had told her to watch for signs of a hidden weapon. Her instinct screamed. "Look out!" she cried. Instantly, Rivers pulled a small derringer from inside his coat. Before he could aim it, a shot rang out from the doorway. Komoto's revolver, Rivers' pistol, clattered to the floor as he collapsed, groaning from a shoulder wound. Soldiers rushed in, subduing him. "You fool," spat Rivers, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. "You think this proves anything? My partners will bury you in red tape. The crow will burn no matter what." Colonel Merriman's face hardened. "You just tried to shoot an old woman in my office, Rivers." "I think we have enough reason to hold you for questioning." Captain Coleridge retrieved Rivers' pistol from the floor, presenting it as evidence. Harriet caught her breath, heart hammering. She had stood within a hair's breadth of death again, saved only by Komoto's vigilance. The fort's hallway buzzed with commotion as Rivers was dragged away, cursing Harriet. And the savage scout, Colonel Merriman, turned to Harriet, a measure of respect in his eyes. "It appears your account deserves serious weight. Mrs. Caldwell?" He rubbed his temple wearily. "I'll be requesting additional investigators to examine Rivers' business dealings. We may well unravel a conspiracy far deeper than one wagon train ambush." Though her body trembled from the scare, Harriet managed a nod. "Thank you, Colonel. That's all I ask, that the truth be heard." Komoto stepped inside, still holding his smoking revolver. He bowed slightly to Harriet, relief on his features. She mirrored his expression, a silent acknowledgement that they had crossed yet another deadly threshold together. Over the following days, Clayton Rivers was formally charged with orchestrating false Indian raids, and a trove of incriminating documents was discovered in his Helena office. Letters revealed elaborate plans to frame the Crow, displace them from their ancestral hunting grounds, and secure mining interests. Colonel Merriman, shaken by the scale of deception, issued an official statement suspending any cavalry missions against the Crow. until a full investigation concluded. For Harriet Caldwell, it was a bittersweet triumph. She'd exposed the man who had caused her family's demise, yet the cost had been unimaginable. At Fort Highbridge, Harriet became something of a quiet hero. Soldiers who once eyed her suspiciously now tipped their hats, muttering thanks for her bravery. Captain Coleridge arranged for her to testify to territorial authorities, ensuring her first-hand account would permanently refute Rivers' false claims. Harriet endured the questioning stoically, never wavering from the details that had haunted her nightmares. She was determined that those who perished at Long Prairie would not be erased from memory. When all was done, Colonel Merriman offered Harriet a place to stay in the fort's infirmary, suggesting her age and health required regular supervision. "You're welcome here, Mrs. Caldwell," he said gently. "We can send word to any relatives back east if you like." But Harriet had made her decision. Standing in the fort's courtyard, she gazed across the plains toward the mountains, remembering the circle of teepees and the quiet acceptance she'd found among the Crow. "I have no true kin left," she replied. "My place is with those who saved me when no one else cared." Arrangements were made. Harriet, escorted by Kamota, and a few soldiers would travel to Helena for a brief deposition. Afterwards, she was free to go where she wished. She voiced her preference openly. "I'll return to Silver Eagle's camp if they'll have me." That simple statement shocked the onlookers, an elderly white woman voluntarily choosing to live among the Crow. But Harriet Caldwell, or Endures the Storm, as they called her, felt more at home there than she ever would in a strange city or some distant relative's drawing room. Helena proved a quick stop, her testimony recorded by a district judge who, upon reading the mountain of evidence against Rivers, seemed astonished. Harriet endured a battery of inane questions. Were you truly in your right mind? How did you survive so long alone? Each time she calmly recited names, details, and the unwavering fact. The Crow were not the monsters. Clayton Rivers was. With official statements signed and sealed, Harriet and Kamota took their leave. 2 weeks later, at the crest of a ridge near the Hidden Valley, Harriet once again beheld the Crow encampment. The turning leaves signaled autumn's approach, but the sweeping circle of teepees, the winding river, and the smell of wood smoke felt like a homecoming. They rode in under watchful eyes, some faces lighting with recognition at Harriet's return. Little Fox ran out squealing with delight. Wiseleaf waited in front of her lodge, arms folded in stoic relief. Silver Eagle formally welcomed Harriet back to the camp, acknowledging her actions in preventing a catastrophic military campaign. Even Strike's Fire, who had once viewed her with suspicion, gave a curt nod of respect. In the weeks that followed, Harriet settled into the rhythms of Crow life more comfortably than before. She resumed her healing lessons under Wiseleaf, this time with an even greater sense of belonging. Freed from the immediate threats of cavalry aggression, the community began preparations for the upcoming seasonal rites. One crisp evening, Harriet sat beside Wiseleaf's fire, sorting dried herbs for winter. She marveled at how far she'd come since the day Kamota found her. She was no longer Harriet Caldwell of Ohio, nor simply a bereaved grandmother seeking closure. She was Endures the Storm, a woman who had outlived the worst the frontier could throw at her, forging new bonds and a new identity. Holding a sprig of sage, Harriet whispered a silent prayer for her lost family, for the Crow people who had taken her in, and for the fragile peace she had helped secure. A final tear slipped down her cheek, equal parts grief and gratitude. She was at peace at last. Looking back, our survivor's path shows that even overwhelming loss can lead to unexpected new beginnings. Surviving the massacre was more than luck. It became a chance to stand up against injustice. In a place where cultural divisions run deep, she chose to stand beside her newfound allies, bringing healing instead of fear. That choice not only saved innocent families, but also opened her heart to a community once deemed an enemy. From my perspective, this tale of an elderly woman and a Crow warrior teaches us that trust can bridge almost any divide when both sides are willing to see beyond prejudice. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, remember to subscribe so you won't miss future stories of resilience and unity in times of trial. Our frontier journey isn't over yet, and your support keeps it alive.